Good afternoon and welcome to Sporty's webinar on flight simulators. What pilots need to know. Our presenter today is Chris McGonegle, and he's the product manager here at Sporty's Pilot Shop. He is our resident flight sim geek and our go-to when it comes to everything flight sim. One quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted for review later this week. So if you get distracted or want to go back and go over some of the material, you can do so by going to sportys.com/webinars. With that, I'll hand it over to Chris. Chris, thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you, Doug. My name is Chris McGonegle, and my goal this afternoon is to help everyone listening have a better understanding of what's required for a flight simulator and what options we have for simulators. I'm the product manager at Sporty's Pilot Shop and also a graduate of the Academy here at Claremont County Airport. I've spent many a days pre-flighting that row of 172s you can just barely make out in the center of our airport picture. So I like to think that I have a pretty firm grasp on the realism and abilities a simulator can offer. Today we're going to cover three separate categories of a flight simulator. Number one, what physical components make a simulator? Second, we'll discuss how a simulator can best be used to keep the rust off active pilots, while also highlighting the enjoyment and opportunities a flight simulator can bring. And lastly, we'll conclude with additional training pieces in theory behind a flight simulator. The first trainer was the Link used in World War II, and it was said that most pilots found the Link trainer more difficult to fly than the airplane itself, and actually would have preferred flying a combat mission instead of a session in this Link trainer. Now, in the almost 80 years since World War II, there have been leaps and bounds in the progress and ability of flight simulating devices. At first glance, this may seem like the inside of some airworthy airplane, but in reality, this is actually a home-built flight simulator designed and constructed by one of our customers. We won't be discussing the challenges of building such a massive simulator, but we will cover what minimum hardware is required to build an effective flight simulator. So let's talk about what is needed for a flight simulator. First part is a computer with a monitor to run software. Next, we need the software itself. And lastly, we'll need flight control hardware to give the system inputs. Let's say we're starting fresh and purchasing a computer solely for a simulator. In that case, the recommended specifications are a 64-bit processor and operating system, Windows 7, 8.1 or 10, or Mac OS X 10.11 or newer, a 3.5 gigahertz or faster processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM or random access memory, a video card with at least 4 gigabytes VRAM or video RAM, internet connection, and lastly, 64 gigabytes of available storage space. Comparable models from big box stores hit all these requirements and start around $250. I like to think of these pieces as the organs of the system. Now, as of today, there are three prominent flight simulator software programs available. As we cover these different software options, I'd like to use the analogy that software is the brain of the system. First up, we have X-Plane 11. Initial pros, there's a free X-Plane 11 demo online, so you get to try before you buy. Another pro is X-Plane 11 supports ForeFlight without an add-on. And what that means is as long as you're on the same Wi-Fi and edit a couple settings, your plane's location and performance in the simulator will be reflected on the ForeFlight application. There's an article on Sporty's iPad Pilot News published April 9th, which covers this feature in more detail. Within the last year, I've personally flown more on X-Plane than any other software platform due to the synergy with ForeFlight and their continuous upgrades and improvements. X-Plane also has a mobile application, but I wouldn't qualify it as a training method. Prepared version 5 was released mid-April of this year. The developer Lockheed Martin describes its platform as a, quote, proven simulation framework application that immerses the user in a rich and interactive environment. A couple pros for Prepared are it's the youngest and up-to-date simulator on the market as of today. The software is well supported and fans are very vocal with their praise. A couple cons are it's difficult to purchase and is more structured towards training with the syllabus rather than open world ability. Prepared is not compatible with Macintosh operating systems, and it's the most expensive program by a factor of almost 3. Microsoft released its 10th edition of the Flight Simulator program on October 13th of 2006. Now, there have been multiple updates to bring new aircraft and systems up to speed with its competitors, but the foundation was laid almost 14 years ago. Some pros associated with Microsoft Flight Simulator are a large batch of included aircraft when you purchase this system, 30 craft, ranging from commercial airliners to single-engine airplanes and helicopters. Couple cons: the graphics and authenticity of use lag the other systems. Another speed bump that may apply in certain scenarios is that MFS X will only work on Macintosh systems if they have an Intel processor. The largest con of this system is that it will be left in the dust when the new Microsoft Flight Simulator comes out in a little over a month. That's right. On June 9th of 2019, Microsoft announced that they're working on a new flight simulator program. And as of this Monday, Microsoft announced that the new Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 will be released on August 18th for immediate download. The program will run on PC and the Xbox platform and has a colossal following online. From my conversations with vendors, alpha and beta testers, and personal research, I'm led to believe that this system will revolutionize the flight simulator platform and really bring state-of-the-art software qualities to the commercial user. I highly recommend checking out their Discovery series on YouTube to better understand what they've created, and be sure to mark your calendar for August 18th. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least cover what Microsoft has outlined as the recommended computer specifications are. To most, this may seem like a foreign language, as it once was to me, but I'll try and demystify what each row is indicating, which I somewhat covered earlier on in this presentation. So, minimum operating system version, this is self-explanatory. Program will only run on Windows 10. CPU stands for Central Processing Unit, and this is the speed with which the computer can receive your input, analyze it, and come to the conclusion of how it will affect the current scenario. These tasks happen thousands of times a second, but the faster CPUs increase that frequency exponentially. CPUs have different amounts of cores, and the more cores your processor contains, the faster it can handle the tasks, which lead to smoother operation. GPU stands for Graphics Card Unit, and this is the piece that is able to visually project what the CPU has just relayed the changes to the scenario would look like. VRAM is Video RAM and designates how much short-term video or imagery the computer stores, whereas RAM is much more short-term data the computer can store. Plain and simple, the more the better. HDD stands for Hard Disk Drive and is the amount of storage your computer has. You will need a comfortable amount of backup and store sceneries, airplanes, updates, and portions of the globe for when you're flying. Lastly, bandwidth is the speed with which your internet provider is providing information. Hardwire is always better than Wi-Fi, and these speeds really come into play if you're continuously receiving data from the web. Think live weather or multiplayer with other airplanes. In wrapping up, I'd like to think of these as percentages. The minimum specs would serve as about 33%. Recommended specs are 66%, and the ideal specs are the full 100%. When I built the simulator we use for testing at Sporty's, we constructed a system I would rate at about 92%. Not the top of the line, but also enough power to work well and keep up with updates for a while. Financially, I like to associate it towards wringing out a wet rag. The first half requires a little effort, but it gets more and more difficult as you squeeze out those last few percentages. Same with the cost of a computer. It will get exponentially more expensive for each percentage you get closer to the ideal specs. And for reference of how much it would cost to design a system like ours with about a 92-point rating, our invoice for roughly about $1,600. So let's move back into the software portion for those of you who haven't fallen asleep. Infinite Flight is a mobile-only platform you can download from the App Store or Google Play. This program will only play on phones or tablets, and I would categorize this more as a game rather than a flight simulator. For a few dollars to start, and more charges to unlock additional airports or airplanes. This could be a fun time consumer while waiting to board a flight, but realistically, there's virtually zero training to be gained from this platform. In July of 2018, the Experimental Aviation Association, or EAA for short, released a virtual flight academy aimed towards virtual instruction. It's a two-stage program with discounted prices for EAA members. Stage 1 focuses on pre-solo content, and Stage 2 covers crosswind operations, emergencies, and other testing materials. You will need a computer, hardware, and a license to Flight Simulator X Steam Edition. If you meet the requirements, this is a nice program to test attention to detail in critical phases of flight and prioritize focus. Now, there are hundreds of hardware options and add-ons out there, but for the sake of everyone's time, we're going to focus on 5 different categories today, and they are yokes, joysticks, throttle quadrants, rudder pedals, and lastly, flight deck complements. And what I mean by this last category are items that will not affect the aircraft's performance in flight, but will bring a more realistic feel toward your flight simulator setup. And in keeping with the anatomy analogies, think of the flight control hardware as the muscles and nervous system of your flight simulator. Here we have 2 entry-level yoke options. And when I say entry-level, I don't want it perceived as cheap. Growing up, I used the CH yoke and throttle, and it did the job just fine. These are yoke options that will allow you to keep a tight budget when building a simulator, but there are some reasons for those lower price points. The CH Products yoke and throttle is a great system, but is entirely plastic and will be the furthest field from an actual airplane yoke. There are multiple buttons on the yoke grip to mirror trim motors, PTT button, autopilot disconnect, and because each button can be programmed to activate/deactivate any function in the airplane, the options are unlimited. There are also 2 bi-directional rockers typically used for flaps or gear, and 3 levers on top typically applied to throttle, mixture, and prop control. CH Products yoke and throttle comes in under $150 and is a great option for beginners. The SATEC Flight Simulator yoke with throttle quadrant is a larger system with the throttle quadrant separate from the yoke housing, allowing customized cockpit layouts. The SATEC model also has a built-in timer on the front of the yoke face in addition to a metal shaft, both features adding to the realistic feel of this yoke. The SATEC yoke with throttle quadrant retails just over $150 and continues to be a fan favorite. Next, we have the all-in-one simulator yoke, which is the new addition to our flight control hardware family. The reason it's referred to as the all-in-one yoke is because this is the only yoke we have found that allows control of pitch, roll, and yaw with one component. The unique bumper paddles attached to the back of the yoke face allow control of the plane's rudder and also taxi turns while on the ground. Throw in throttle, mixture, prop levers, and multiple switches and 2 trim wheels, and this is the ideal entry-level yoke. But to stay within a certain price point, the vendor designed this yoke out of primarily plastic, and in return, doesn't reflect the sturdy design of other systems. The Honeycomb Alpha Flight Simulator yoke fills that durability void. This yoke comes with a stainless steel shaft supported with ball bearings to provide a highly realistic feel. The Honeycomb Alpha also has a switch panel built into the face of the yoke base, including a split master switch, dual bus avionics switches, beacon, landing, taxi, nav, and strobe light switches, in addition to magneto switches. This yoke has been on the market for less than a year, but has already gobbled up significant market share, and reasonably so. You recognize the value of this yoke when first using it, and it kind of just draws out a desire to start flying immediately. One negative of the Honeycomb Alpha Flight Simulator yoke is that it isn't built with a throttle quadrant. But with that being said, from recent conversation with a rep from Honeycomb, I am able to say on good authority that they will have the Bravo throttle quadrant debuting this October, just in time for the holidays. Rounding out our yoke options is the Redbird Flight Simulator Alloy yoke. The Alloy yoke is the most robust yoke on the consumer market by far. The first thing I noticed about this as I took it out of the box is the weight. It's designed to high standards and is used on Redbird certified training devices, so you know you're getting a serious machine with the alloy. This yoke retails for about $800 and really moves a flight simulator from a hobby or enthusiast level to a trainer. Here we have the Logitech Flight Sim Joystick, which is a great option if you want to simulate flying a Diamond or Cirrus when a yoke isn't applicable. As you can see in the second image, there are plenty of programmable switches and rockers. There's also a throttle lever on the aft portion of the base, and to distinguish it even further from the yoke options, it comes with precision twist rudder control to help keep that ball centered. This joystick comes in under $40 and is a great option to control pitch, roll, and yaw for your simulator. Notable mention, we have the Thrustmaster recently announced their Airbus Edition side stick with a release date of late October. This piece comes with interchangeable button configurations on the crown of the stick to allow changes between left and right seat scenarios. There's a lot of praise for this piece online, and I personally forecast we will see a lot of these devices in YouTube simulator reviews and on wish lists for the holidays. Throttle quadrants are a must when it comes to assembling a flight simulator. As one who's tried, it is not worth trying to use a mouse roller as a throttle control. The SATEC throttle quadrant offers a throttle mixture and prop lever with location markings. This quadrant also has 3 two-way toggles at the bottom of the base for added programmable functions. The SATEC throttle retails for just under $60 and is worth its price to assure a flight simulator has throttle controls. A great design feature of the SATEC throttle quadrant is if you purchase 2 quadrants and arrange next to each other, top knobs can be arranged, and with a little bit of control dedication, you have 6 levers for multi-engine setup. The CH Products multi-engine throttle quadrant continues the desire towards multi-training with 2 levers for throttle, prop control, and mixture, allowing realistic practice of identify, verify, feather, and the 6 two-way toggle switches offer ample customization. CH Products multi-engine throttle quadrant comes in around $160 and is a signifier and commitment towards a wide variety of training. And towards the higher price point of the throttle quadrant spectrum, we have the Redbird Flight Simulator single throttle in both vernier and lever styles. Just as with the Redbird yoke, these throttle systems are made to last and durably constructed. The vernier style with push-pull knobs for throttle, prop, and mixture will provide the closest feel towards operating a Cessna 172 that you can find. The addition of a landing gear and flaps lever completes the package. And if you prefer the systems of an Archer or Bonanza, then the lever style is ideal. Both single throttle options retail for $569, but if you like the unparalleled construction of the Redbird throttles, but don't want to settle for single engine systems, then the twin throttle from Redbird is what you're looking for. This quadrant includes dual throttle, prop, and mixture controls, in addition to the pre-mentioned flaps and landing gear lever. One final add-on complementing this design is the rudder trim button. If you're committed to multi-engine simulation, then the $600 Redbird Flight Simulator twin throttle is strongly worth considering. Rudder pedals are the most overlooked addition when it comes to constructing a flight simulator, but they are required to complete the system. They'll undoubtedly reduce stress when it comes to holding centerline on a taxiway or practicing 0-0 takeoffs. They're a required feature to keep muscle memory and flight control flows as realistic as possible, in addition to coordinated flight. The CH Products Rudder Pedals is the base of options available and will keep your budget on course retailing for $129.95. Next up is the SATEC Rudder Pedals, adding the ability of customizing the size of the footwells along with an adjustable tension dial. The SATEC model offers fluid motion and differential braking, all for just under $170. Lastly, the Redbird rudder pedals utilize a spring system, meaning you can apply real rudder pressure rather than only rudder travel, just as you would when flying real aircraft. The all-metal Redbird pedals use the same technology found in Redbird's family of simulator hardware, so they're not only realistic, they are virtually indestructible. Redbird rudder pedals retail for $599. The flight deck complements are hardware options that I wouldn't recommend for beginners. These are options to upgrade a familiar system to being one step closer to a real flight deck, or for someone who looks forward to the bells and whistles of a simulator rather than just the foundation. With that being said, they can be greatly improving of the experience of using a simulator and offer additional layers to emergency training in addition to all phases of flight. Here we have the Pro Flight radio panel offering COM 1, 2, Nav 1, Nav 2, DME, ADF, and transponder functions. Also the Pro Flight switch panel offering a landing gear lever with position lights, magneto switch, battery, and alternator switches, and 11 other switches to denote to aircraft functions. Radio panel retails for about $150 and the switch panel for a hair under $100. ProFlight rounds out third with the multi-panel offering full autopilot, auto throttle switch, flap handle, and an elevator trim wheel. The ProFlight multi-panel comes in at $149.99, and with all three ProFlight options and congruence, you can have a pretty potent control stack for under $400. Here we have the Redbird Aviation Headset Connect, converting aircraft-style PJ plugs into standard computer audio jacks. Both audio and microphone connect to allow for two-way communication. This headset connector is great if you really want to parallel the experience of flying with the clamping pressure on your head, or if you'd like to utilize a simulator for communications training. Lastly, the Flight Velocity mid-profile cockpit panel, which I'll start by saying does not include everything in this picture. It's the high-strength ABS plastic panel holding all the hardware we see here and is a great way to organize simulator components. The panel comes with pre-cut holes which are visible on the left side of the panel. The headset connect is $129.99 and the cockpit panel retails for about $190. The Flight Velocity trim wheel is a great enhancement to a flight simulator in that it continues the steps towards realism for a trainer, but also allows the precise changes to a flight profile that is required in certain aircraft. A lot of the yokes we've discussed contain a trim knob to simulate motorized trim, but there's something that takes me back to training with the wheel. The fact that it retails for just under $80 won't disrupt the budget either. Lastly, for flight deck complements, we'll cover a great learning tool, the GNS 430 and GNS 530 from Real Sim Gear. These simulator avionics are designed to work in tandem with your chosen airplane in the simulator to allow ease of control when it comes to the GPS in your digital airplane. When I was training, I remember scouring the web for ways to learn the Garmin 430 we had in our plane. Sure, it was easy to find the manual and read what each button does, but I wanted to see the map move or the colors change as I cycled through its operations. I never found one during my training, but this would have been exactly what I was looking for. And with a little bit of syncing up, they will work smoothly with X-Plane and Prepared to allow ease of navigation and learning of the avionics package. Lastly, for anyone who has tried to pan down during simulated flight and rotate the ever-changing location of the knobs in a digital cockpit, it's next to impossible. Having a tangible item you can use while digitally flying is extremely helpful, and both units retail for under $400 and will strongly complement any simulator. So we've thoroughly combed through some options for building a flight simulator piece by piece, but what if we want to order an entire package and have everything we need with one transaction? Well, we've got that option also. Redbird offers multiple flight simulator kits ranging from the entry-level needs up to a basic aviation training device, which are eligible for logging recency. We'll start at the beginning with the Redbird Alloy Flight Simulator Complete Kit, including the above yoke, rudder, and push-pull throttle quadrant. A computer and software will be required to complete this setup, but once you have those two taken care of, you're ready to fly. The Redbird J is the next step in Redbird flight simulators. This option includes a computer, a screen, and pre-installed prepared flight sim software. All that's required is a desk to hold the components, an electrical input, and high-speed internet. Redbird Alloy retails for just under $2,000, and the Redbird J is yours for about $2,600. The Redbird J Velocity builds on the Redbird J model by adding highly robust internal components in addition to upgraded computing power for higher reliability. The J Velocity is designed for demanding environments such as museums or public access kiosks, so the reinforced internals and increased computing power goes a really long way. The Redbird TD flight simulator is in a league of its own. The TD includes one cockpit configuration, either steam or glass panel, a computer, instrument panel, switch panel, monitor, keyboard, and speakers. The TD will fit perfectly in a small flight school when recreating lessons or cleaning up a debrief. It's also a great option for at-home use to keep skills and flows fluid. The J Velocity retails for $3,995 and the TD goes for $6,995. Last and certainly not least, we come to what I like to call the big kahuna, the Redbird TD2 flight simulator. The TD2 carries everything the TD offered, in addition to the option to fly with or without retractable landing gear, a constant speed propeller, and a high performance engine. The TD2 offers a steam gauge configuration paired with a Garmin 530 style GPS and CAP 140 style autopilot, or a glass configuration in a G1000 layout with the GFC 700 style autopilot. The top of the line TD2 is out the door at $7,995. Now, one of the most common questions I'm asked when talking about simulators are, how do I log my training or stay current? And during the summer of 2018, the FAA announced significant changes that aim to make it easier for pilots to keep their instrument currency using an aviation training device, or ATD for short. When a Redbird TD or TD2 is paired with rudder pedals, it qualifies as an ATD. FAR 61.51 was amended to remove any reference to a flight instructor so pilots can fly instrument flights at home without scheduling an instructor. FAR 61.51 reads, a person may use time in a full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device for satisfying instrument currency experience requirements, provided a logbook or training record is maintained to specify the training device time and the content. In addition, FAR 61.57 was also amended to allow a flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device to be used for maintaining instrument experience, which covers the familiar 6 approaches. FAR 61.57 reads, provided the device represents the category of aircraft for the instrument rating privileges to be maintained, and the pilot performs the tasks and iterations in simulated instrument conditions. Person may complete the instrument experience in any combination of an aircraft, full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device. So there we have it from the horse's mouth. You are able to use at-home certified devices with the required rudder pedal add-on for instrument training without an instructor, and you may complete the required tasks to stay instrument current. So now that we've covered the body of a flight simulator, let's focus on what we can actually do with said system. I believe it's important to cover 2 quick points before we dive into simulator abilities. One, if you are serious about using the simulator as a tool to stay current or fluid in procedures of flying an airplane, then don't cut corners and operate the plane just like you would in the real world. Begin the session on the ramp with engines off. Run your checklists and start the engine. Test brakes, perform a run-up, talk on the radio. The more we add to our simulated flying world that brings us closer to real-life tendencies, the more effective this system will be at keeping you sharp. And number 2, no matter how much money you throw into a simulator, you will not attain real-world quality flying. Plain and simple. You'll never fly by the seat of your pants in a simulator. You'll never smell a change in the cabin to indicate an engine issue. And you won't understand the appreciation for going full power and feeling cold airflow on your face during the balmy summer days. We must observe the simulator as a way to strengthen a muscle, not learn the exercise. And with that being said, a simulator can be a potent arrow in the quiver of staying proficient and up to date on current systems. There are 4 categories, we are going to discuss when it comes to scenarios for a simulator. Number 1 will be VFR maneuvers, followed by IFR maneuvers. Third, we have emergencies, and lastly, fun flying. Just as I recommended preparing for takeoffs as you would in the airplane, I also recommend clearing turns before practicing maneuvers. Now, I'm sure there are a few pilots who just scoffed at their computer, but to stay true to realism and as a muscle memory warm-up towards the real thing, I do advise it. When it comes to maneuvers, I like to mention a few that would make you sweat a little bit if it was in real life. We have the ability to practice/simulate the more demanding maneuvers in a safe environment. Power on stalls. These used to guarantee I would have a sweaty shirt during our debrief, but eventually became fun for me. With a simulator teetering on the envelope, don't be afraid to see what happens when you kick the rudder full deflection in a power on stall, but only start tweaking the maneuver once you've mastered it. Crosswind approach and landing. This can be a great maneuver aimed towards input and really seeing what some strong crosswinds can do to your airplane. Take the wind up to your plane's maximum tested level and see just how hard it is to land the airplane in those conditions. Rejected takeoff. The rejected takeoff may seem like a waste of time, but it is a good skill to practice, and you can even try aborting the takeoff at continuously later stages of the takeoff roll. VFR into IFR. This maneuver is meant to give the VFR pilot a taste of what instrument flying is like. Nonetheless, it's a good maneuver to practice in a simulator by flying into a wall of overcast clouds and slowly flying a 180-degree turn while maintaining altitude and airspeed. Mountain flying with a required chandelle. The chandelle, which means candle in French, is believed to have originated in dogfighting and allowed the pilot to reverse direction in a minimum radius climbing turn. Personally, this was my favorite maneuver throughout my training, and my request to fly one on my check ride somewhat took the examiner by surprise. Although you can't find any dogfights in a 172, you can apply this maneuver to mountain flying. If you find yourself in a crevice and realize the walls are closing in around you, this is the advised maneuver to turn back the way you came in the smallest lateral footprint. Try simulating one in the Smoky Mountains and see how your plane reacts. Takeoff and landing at a very high density altitude airport. Once you become accustomed to the takeout roll in your simulated Cessna 172 or whatever plane you're using at home airport in normal conditions, go take off from an airport with a very high elevation. Or find one around 3000 MSL, crank outside air temperature to 100 degrees, and bring the baro pressure down to 29.5. This will greatly reduce the performance of the engine and in turn lengthen your takeoff roll. It's pretty eye-opening the first time you simulate this scenario with full tanks. Also, before I move on, the majority of the images I've used for maneuvers thus far are from Sporty's Learn to Fly course, and if you're looking for an index of flight maneuvers, in addition to HD videos for all phases of flight, I highly recommend checking out that course. Next, we're going to increase the challenge with some IFR maneuvers. First up is the heart racing 0-0 takeoff. Now, I've never flown an actual 0-0 takeoff, but I simulated over a dozen while training, and I've flown about as many in the simulator. This is a great challenge for rudder control on takeoff and also tracking desired heading once you've left the ground. Intercepting and tracking VOR radials is a maneuver aimed towards precision in navigating, which is a requisite when flying IFR. A simulator is a great way to quickly test the sensitivity of intersecting a radial 30 miles out from the source versus 5 miles out. Holding procedures and entry can be a very intimidating portion of IFR flight, but through repetition and some mental math, they become secondhand. Try flying holds off a created waypoint and then upgrade to flying holding procedures off a missed approach. Try flying a timed hold rather than a distance-based hold for extra credit. The DME arc is a rare maneuver, but still a challenging one, and once completely understood, allows for better navigational abilities. GPS fails in flight, but the airport has a VOR. Fly a DME arc at a safe altitude until perpendicular with the runway heading radial, then turn inbound and you should be on a long final. ILS down to minimums is the IFR maneuver I try and fly once a week. If I ever find myself in a scenario where I need to land at an airport with weather just above minimums, I want to have this procedure down pat. For an added challenge, I'll sometimes throw a crosswind in once 3 miles out to keep my scan inside the plane from getting fixated, while also searching for those lights outside the plane. The circling approach procedure is one of the least used approaches in the world of localizer and RNAV approaches, but still a useful scenario for practice. Tempting to grab a $100 coffee and the morning fog hasn't cleared up at your preferred smaller airport? This just may be the way you earn that coffee. I'd like to pause a second and explain the different approach I take when it comes to training for emergencies. All the maneuvers we've covered are things we can look forward to flying in the airplane or in the digital world. When it comes to emergencies, we train for these so that if we ever experience one, we are absolutely prepared for it. If you are a pilot and wanting to use a simulator to strengthen emergency flows, I can't stress enough the value of chair flying and learning the concrete flows before jumping into a digital simulator. Once you know all the required steps to attempt a restart and then secure the engine, if you ever see this sight picture on screen, then you're prepared to simulate the emergency and see how different inputs yield different results in this critical phase of flight. Now that the disclaimer is taken care of, let's discuss a few of my favorite emergencies to simulate. The emergency approach and landing is the most probable emergency we will see as aviators. Whether from fuel starvation or engine failure, it's good to know the best glide of your airplane and find out the range and approach that works for your bird. Just as we can practice an emergency approach and landing in real training, we should save the engine failure during climb out maneuver for the simulator. What to do in this scenario should be covered in every departure briefing, but here we are actually able to test what would happen to the airplane and what our sight picture would be. Try neutralizing the engine at 200 feet AGL, then 400, then 600, then 800. Try killing the engine at pattern altitude and see if you have the maneuverability to make the 180-degree turn back to the runway. Now run that same cycle and throw a 12-knot direct crosswind into the mix. Great maneuver to practice on the simulator. Electrical failure at night are an extreme nuisance and test our ability to aviate, navigate, and communicate. Simulate shutting off the electrical system over a busy area like Manhattan. Then try the same emergency over rural Oklahoma. Ground lighting will affect ability to fly the plane noticeably, and it's a better lesson to learn in a simulator than in the real world. Emergency descents are a very fun maneuver in real life and in the flight simulator. They simulate if we have an emergency with a passenger and need to land at an airport beneath us while in cruise. It's a great test of airspeed control and creates a sight picture that's very rare in flying. The Power Off 360 accuracy approach is a great test of control of the plane and analyzing all your numbers to make sure you can make the landing where you would like to. This maneuver is taught in the commercial phase of training, and its execution requires great control of the plane and energy. IFR flight with pitot blockage may be one of the most demanding emergencies in my eyes. When you lose an engine, whether in, say, VFR or IFR, you know it from the loss of noise. When the electrical system goes out, it's glaringly obvious. When the pitot port is blocked, it's difficult to diagnose because you have other instruments providing information that can counter what the airspeed indicator is telling you. I've spoken to a few pilots who've experienced this condition, and while they were appreciative of their training, they're glad that the numbers say they'll never experience that again. And now that we've covered emergencies, let's discuss one of the main reasons people buy a flight simulator: fun flying. A simulator offers the joy of partaking in a flight we otherwise wouldn't have the logistical, financial, or maybe legal ability to fly. The simulator opens that door to us. First mission I'll throw out is Lindbergh's transatlantic flight. Now, I'd recommend a faster bird that could make the distance, so you don't have to run your simulator for 33.5 hours like Lindbergh did. But if you want to designate a weekend to it, I'm not going to judge. A real world scenario that I hope to fly, even though it'll take some persuading for my significant other to budget the vacation days for, is flying the Alaskan coastline in a Cub. Sure, you can cruise around in a 210 or something that drinks avgas faster, but to take in the view around the same speed you would on the highway, but from 1,000 feet, there's something tranquil about that, in my mind at least. Follow in Cal Rogers' footsteps by retracing the 4,000-mile transcontinental flight. As you can tell, this milestone was made in the early days of aviation, 1911 to be exact, but he's solidified his spot in aviation history. Now, sadly, Cal Rogers passed away the year after his accomplishment, but a quick Google of the flight legs he flew over 100 years ago and a retracement of those steps is a fitting tribute to his adventurous nature. Speaking of aviation history, it should be required to consider yourself an aviator to have landed at Devil Hills, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. This is where the Wright brothers chiseled their way into world history. Now, you may not be able to walk through the Wright Brothers National Memorial Visitor Center in a simulator, but you can observe this aviation mecca from the air. Add a little time to your flight and approach from the south to enjoy the Outer Banks. Along with the Alaskan themed flight, flip the temperatures and try flying the beautiful African countryside from a low altitude. I can't confirm if giraffes will be on VFR charts as obstacles, but I'm sure there are some great sunset views from 1000 AGL. And the last fun flying scenario, and probably least legal scenario, is to enjoy the Eiffel Tower at night. I haven't experienced the joy of viewing this old radio tower in person yet, but I know it would be fun to see from the skies at night, and a simulator may be the only way to do that. Finally, we're going to cover a couple flight simulator complements, and we'll start with VATSIM, which stands for Virtual Air Traffic Simulation Network. This is a network you can join with your flight simulator and fly around the world with other sim enthusiasts. Every plane you see in that screenshot above is a simmer flying as of yesterday afternoon. It's a great way to keep radio skills proficient with simmers designated as ATC or tower controllers. The platform is completely free and boasts over 79,000 members. Pilot Edge is somewhat similar to VATSIM in network design, but the main difference is that the controllers are real-world air traffic controllers. This brings a high level of professionalism and realism to Pilot Edge. Therefore, subscriptions start at $19.95 monthly, but allow savings through annual subscriptions. ForeFlight is a phenomenal system to pair with any flight simulator. The ability to track a flight's location, performance, and even add AHRS is great. I rarely simulate flights anymore without running ForeFlight in concert. Their track log feature allows analysis of the flight, which is beneficial to clean up problematic areas and improvability in the airplane. It's an ideal way to review maneuvers and emergency performance. On the left screen, you can see a little bit before the 9 a.m. mark, I simulated an engine out scenario about 7 miles from Wilmington at 3,500 MSL. I made it easy on myself by experiencing the engine failure when I was lined up with the runway, but the next scenario, not going to be so easy. On the right, I departed Sporty's and flew over Lunken for the 2-1 left ILS approach. To stay true to training, you can see the outbound leg and the lasso towards the top of the picture indicating the outbound and inbound intercept. My airspeed and altitude were a little shaky early on, but I feel confident I made up for it when I pegged the glide slope down to minimums. This was also a scenario where I edited the overcast clouds to break when I was about 150 above minimums. I highly recommend ForeFlight as an add-on to your simulator, and as updates continue, the features will continue to increase and benefit the sim community as well as pilots. Now, in closing, I like to put the homework to everyone who is considering a flight simulator to ask themselves 2 questions when it comes to a future simulator. First question, am I going to use this as a toy for a fun pastime or a way to fill the weekend stuck inside? Or am I going to use it as a tool to strengthen my abilities? Will I turn it on and just see where the 172 takes me? Or will I have a dedicated mission for each cycle I fly to keep the rest from accruing? And the second question is, how much can I spend on this simulator? Usually that number is very dependent on your answer to that first question. But if you're serious about it, really consider the quality of the machine you want to help with your flying. And if used correctly, it will save you money, training, and headaches down the road. Majority of the products we covered today are available at Sporty's Pilot Shop. You can find all our flight simulator products in the drop-down box that I've outlined on this screenshot with the yellow boxes. A significant number of the digital images I used today for maneuvers and emergencies are from Sporty's Learn to Fly course. And if you're looking to learn why a plane reacts the way it does, review maneuvers, or study for a written test, I recommend browsing that product. If you'd like an additional advice or assistance in planning out a flight simulator, please send me an email at flightsim@sportys.com or call our customer service at the number listed. And that concludes my presentation. Doug, I'll open the floor for questions.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's all some great information. It's amazing to see how far flight sims have come in just a short amount of time. We did have a couple questions here. One is in regards to VFR flying. This is a brand new pilot, one lesson under his belt, and he says, what should I be focusing on as a new pilot when it comes to flight simming?
As a new pilot, and to avoid mislearning something or learning it the incorrect way and then having to go back and trying to fix it in the plane, I would advise, maybe getting 3 lessons in with your instructor, and then tell your instructor, hey, I've got this simulator at home. I really want to start using it so that I can, tighten up my numbers and really get the best use out of it. And they'll be able to give you those advice or pieces you can work on at home, which in essence will save you future flights or review flights.
Great advice. The next question is a lapsed IPC pilot. He's an IFR pilot looking to keep current. What can he do to keep up with the skills that he has might have gotten a little rusty on?
That's a great question. And I consider myself in the boat of, I use the simulator a lot to keep my IFR flying current. The biggest takeaway you can really gain from a simulator is your scans. Get in a plane that's very similar to the one you fly in or train in, and just work in those scans. Now, I'll be honest, it can still get a little tense or worrisome in a simulated environment when you're socked into the clouds. You're away from the airport, and maybe some things aren't going the way you want. But it's a good way to dig yourself out of that hole and really keep the flows, kind of be up to speed on approaches and the latest uses of avionics to make sure when you jump back in that plane, you're a lot closer to being current.
Excellent information. And that's the wrap up of all our questions today, Chris. We appreciate all the information. There's a reminder to all our listeners out there, this webinar will be posted on YouTube here shortly, so you can review it if needed. If you want to contact us here at Sporties, it's flightsim@sporties.com or 513-735-9000. Thanks again, Chris, for all the good work.
Thank you.